20 minutes. The final out had barely been recorded. The crowd was still filtering out of the stadium. The players were still in the middle of the specific, unwinding chaos of a post-game clubhouse, cleats coming off, showers running, the low hum of a team returning to itself after 3 hours of competition. 20 minutes. That is how long the Dodgers GM waited before walking to the microphone. Not the next morning. Not after a night of deliberation and a carefully worded statement drafted by the communications team. Not after the kind of measured pause that front offices usually insert between a game ending and a decision becoming public. 20 minutes after the final out, the Dodgers GM stood in front of cameras and announced something that nobody in that building, nobody covering this team, nobody inside this organization, had been told was coming. 3 regular players released. A completely revamped starting rotation. A new pitcher. $150 million. Done. And Shohei Ohtani's fingerprints on every single part of it. To understand why 20 minutes matters, you have to understand what 20 minutes means in the context of how professional baseball organizations operate. Roster decisions of this magnitude do not happen in 20 minutes. They are built over weeks. Over conversations that happen in layers, scouts to front office to ownership, ownership back to front office, legal review, medical review, the specific contractual architecture that turns an intention into a binding commitment. The machinery of a major league transaction is not fast. It is deliberate by design. Because the cost of moving too quickly, of releasing the wrong player or committing to the wrong contract in a moment of competitive emotion, is the kind of cost that franchises spend years recovering from. 20 minutes after the game ended, all of that machinery had already finished running. Which means the decisions announced tonight were not made tonight. They were made before the first pitch. Before the lineup cards were exchanged. Before the game that just ended had even begun. The GM walked to that microphone knowing exactly what he was going to say. He had known all day. Possibly longer. The timing was the message. 3 players released. Not traded. Not designated for assignment with the soft cushion of a 10-day window and the possibility of a deal materializing somewhere in that gap. Released. Cleanly. Finally. The kind of roster move that closes a door completely and asks the players on the other side of it to find their own way forward. These were not fringe players. These were not end-of-roster depth pieces whose absence would register only in the statistics of someone tracking organizational depth across a spreadsheet. These were regular players. Players with roles. Players who had come to that clubhouse with the reasonable expectation that their place on the 26-man was stable enough to build a professional routine around. That expectation ended tonight. The GM did not spend significant time on the releases during the press conference. He acknowledged them. He spoke about them with the specific, careful respect that a front office owes to players who gave the organization what was asked of them. But he did not linger. Because releasing 3 players, on any other night, would have been the entire story. Tonight it was the opening paragraph. The starting rotation has been completely revamped. That sentence carries more weight than it might appear to on first reading. Starting rotations are not restructured casually. They are the load-bearing architecture of a baseball team's identity. The names at the top of a pitching staff determine how opposing managers prepare, how lineups are constructed, how series are approached from a strategic standpoint 3 days in advance. Changing one starter changes the equation. Changing the entire rotation changes the team. The Dodgers changed the rotation. The new structure, as the GM laid it out, reflects a specific philosophy about what this team needs to look like in October. Not in May. Not in the comfortable middle section of a season where a talented roster can absorb inefficiency and still win enough games to feel fine. In October. When the margin for error compresses to almost nothing and the starting pitcher on the mound in a deciding game is the single most important variable on the field. The GM built this rotation for that moment. And the centerpiece of the new structure, the name that the $150 million contract belongs to, was confirmed before the press conference was 3 minutes old. $150 million. The number lands differently when you hear it announced 20 minutes after a game ends. In the clinical context of a front office transaction, $150 million is a number that gets processed analytically: years, average annual value, deferred money, opt-outs, performance incentives. The architecture of the commitment. In the context of a press conference that nobody knew was coming, delivered at a speed that suggested the organization had been sitting on this information for hours and had chosen this specific moment to release it, $150 million feels like something else. It feels like a statement. The pitcher who signed that contract is not a developmental project. Not a reclamation story. Not a calculated gamble on upside that has not yet fully materialized. This is a proven arm. A pitcher who opposing lineups have been unable to solve consistently, whose track record across multiple seasons in high-pressure environments justifies every digit of the number attached to his name. He is exactly what a revamped rotation needs at the front of it. And the Dodgers paid exactly what it took to get him. But the number is not even the most significant part of this story. The most significant part is how the deal got done. Ohtani was involved in the negotiations. Not as an agent. Not in any formal, contractual capacity that the league's rules would need to review. But in the specific, informal way that a player of Ohtani's standing inside an organization can be involved when the front office understands that recruiting at the highest level of the sport is not purely a financial transaction. The best players in baseball talk to each other. They have relationships that exist outside the organizational structures that employ them, built over international competition, over shared training environments, over the specific fraternity that forms among athletes who have operated at the same extraordinary level for long enough to recognize each other as peers. Ohtani used those relationships. When the Dodgers identified their target, when the front office determined that this was the pitcher they needed and that the gap between wanting him and getting him was not purely about money, Ohtani made a call. What was said in that conversation is not public. The details of what Ohtani communicated, what he described about playing in Los Angeles, about this organization, about what it feels like to be part of a team that is genuinely built to win in October, none of that has been formally documented. But the pitcher signed. And the people inside the Dodgers organization who know the sequence of events understand exactly what role Ohtani's involvement played in making that happen. The GM was asked about it directly during the press conference. He didn't deflect. He didn't offer the standard language about competitive privacy and internal processes. He answered. Shohei cares about winning, the GM said. He has always cared about winning. And when the opportunity arose for him to express to another player what this organization is about, what we're building, what October means to us, he did that. Voluntarily. Without being asked twice. He paused. That is not something you can manufacture. You cannot create that in a player. Either they care about the team in that way or they don't. Shohei cares. A reporter followed up immediately. Asked whether it was appropriate for a player to be involved in recruiting another player. Whether the lines between Ohtani's role as an athlete and his informal influence as the face of the franchise had been crossed in a way that required examination. The GM's expression didn't shift. Shohei talked to another baseball player about playing baseball in Los Angeles. That is the entirety of what happened. I'll let you decide whether that requires examination. The room absorbed that. Then moved to the next question. Dave Roberts had been sitting 2 seats to the GM's left throughout the press conference. Quiet. Present. Letting the front office lead a conversation that was fundamentally a front office conversation. But when the questions turned to the rotation, to what the new structure means for how Roberts manages a game, constructs a bullpen, approaches a series, he leaned forward slightly. This is the staff I wanted, he said. Not a version of it. Not a close approximation. This is exactly what I asked for going into this season, and the front office delivered it. He looked briefly at the GM. A small nod passed between them. Now we have to go win with it. That part is on us. A reporter asked whether the speed of tonight's announcements, the 20-minute window, the compressed timeline between game and press conference, reflected a new urgency inside the organization. A recalibration of how quickly the Dodgers were willing to move. Roberts considered the question for a moment. We moved when the moment was right, he said. The moment was right tonight. He didn't expand on it. He didn't need to. Somewhere in the clubhouse behind those press conference doors, 3 players were beginning the process of understanding that their time as Dodgers had ended without warning on a Tuesday night. A new pitcher was somewhere in this city, or on his way to it, carrying the weight of $150 million and the expectation of a fanbase that has been told his arm is the final piece. And Ohtani, who made a phone call, who had a conversation, who used the specific gravity of who he is to help bring this team something it needed, was doing what Ohtani does after every game. Preparing for the next one. The GM announced it 20 minutes after the final out. But Ohtani had already been building toward it for longer than that. That is the part that never makes the press conference.